Hi folks. Okay, I'm going to try and skim through on this episode my days at Goodyear and the 1986 season. There's one or two little highlights to come out of it yet, but yeah, if I go on about it forever, we'll never get through to some of the other things. So where we left it was we'd been to Germany, Hungary, and Austria, and I've given you the tales of that in episode 7. But one thing I'd just like to wind back very quickly was in remember one night in Hungary in the Intercontinental Hotel. We were sat around having a drink at the bar, and it was getting a bit late, but we heard this. We just heard this bit of a noise going on, and we were aware of James Hunt just walking into the hotel. And for those of you that know of James, about James, whatever, this is just absolutely typical. He'd obviously been out on the town somewhere, and he came in and he got a dinner jacket on, he got a dress shirt on, he got a pair of shorts on and a pair of flip-flops. And he got a girl, lovely couple of girls on, he got a girl on each arm. And he came in and he was, he'd had a good night. And headed over to the lift with these two girls in tow. And the lift doors closed and, you probably know the rest. He was a lad. He was a real lad, and we had some good times with James actually. But anyway, I think the following race was Monza, and again, nothing too much to report from there, apart from the fact that the old pits at Monza were very low. And they dated back to the days of, the real old garage Easters at Ferrari and that. And there wasn't so much a proper garage that the teams could work out of. They were like little pit boxes. But anyway, they were very low roof. All I can remember really is after the race, as you can imagine, all of the tifosi come over the track. And basically, there wasn't much of a fence, as I remember as well. It was just sort of a low pit wall. Everybody's come over the pit wall, into the pit lane, over the roofs of the garages. And we're trying to strip off all the tyres after the race. And all we're trying to do is fight off some of these Italian guys who are just trying to rob the tyres. And I can remember one guy was running off down the pit lane, and with one of our fellas in pursuit of him with a big metal fitting bar, and he dropped the tyre pretty quickly. But that was that. So that was Monza. Nothing else I can really think about with that. The following race was Portugal. Once again, pretty nondescript as far as I can remember. The only thing at the time was the McLaren cars, who obviously used to run in the red and white Marlboro colours. For this particular race, Keke Rosberg in the one McLaren, he came out with these yellow and white car, which was another brand of cigarette that Marlboro were doing. So I think that was it really. I really don't remember too much more about the Portuguese race. So we headed back up the road from there, and essentially that was the end of the European season. And we got 2 races to go, which were Mexico and Australia. So we get all of the equipment back in Wolverhampton, and it's all loaded up into containers, basically to go by sea over to Mexico. So we'd got possibly 3 weeks before we went out to that race, and we took the time to have a few days off after we'd loaded all the equipment and sent it on its way, and obviously all the tyres as well. But one of the things that we had to do before we went to Mexico was have a immunisation for typhoid, for one thing, and for malaria. So we went to the Goodyear doctor, because they'd got pretty well like quite an extensive medical facility at Goodyear. As you can imagine, it was I think it was about 7,000 people worked there. So we're booked in to have our typhoid injections. Now, bearing in mind what I told you in one of the earlier videos, the Goodyear lads had a habit of inflicting pain at any time they could. It was just one of those things. If anybody's ever had a typhoid jab, they are extremely, extremely painful. So we all marched in and had these jabs in our arms, and within about an hour, your arm's going dead, and it really hurts. And malaria tablets were nothing; you just took those. But going back to the tradition of our pass it on game, where people inflicted pain on each other, somebody came up with the idea of having an arm punching competition. So, and you couldn't get away from this. You'd go up to the doctors, you'd have your jab, you came back down to the workshop where we were, and essentially you had to be punched in the arm exactly where you just had your jab. And my God, it hurt. And this time it wasn't me that came up with this prank, but somebody else did. But I had to be part of it. I'd got to take the punch on the arm, and then I'd got to administer one as well. But I can tell you that I drove home from work that night, and I couldn't change gear on my left arm. I was having to drive with one hand, move my hand down to the gear stick, and change gear. Yeah, that was great fun. But getting into Mexico, we'd not been there before. I think this was sort of one of the races that they'd gone back to, and the track. We were staying in the middle of Mexico City. Well, earlier that year, I think possibly 7 or 8 months before the race or something, they'd had an absolutely massive earthquake, and we were going past some real devastation and some poor areas in Mexico as well. But I remember going past a multi-storey car park which had all collapsed, and the cars were still facing nose down. There were loads of them. But we were there to race, and also it's God knows how many feet above sea level there. So the air quality is really bad, but also it was very, very hard to breathe because of the altitude. And quite a few of us, we got, it was like the flu, and we were trying to work, but we normally, where we would, for instance, be on the fitting table, and it would take us quite a while to, we'd get all the work done, and we'd probably work in kind of 4-hour shifts or something like that. But over in Mexico, we were just having to work for an hour at a time, and it was hard. And I personally wasn't feeling good at all. So in Formula One, we had the medical facilities were essentially Prof. Sid Watkins, who, again, if you know your motor racing, he was the man. He had some horrendous situations to deal with in later years. I mean, he was a big friend of Ayrton Senna, and obviously when Senna died, Sid was the doctor that was on site at Imola. But Sid had a standard prescription for any ailment. And basically that was whiskey and paracetamol. So he prescribed whiskey and paracetamol for me. He said, you'll be fine, so take that. Couple of years later, three years later, I actually damaged my back in Montreal lifting engine off a engine trolley into a box. I ended up in the hospital with that, and I still suffer with that to this day, sort of 30 years later. But I was put in the ambulance, taken down to the hospital. Sid came and had a look at me, and he said, he says, you'll be okay. He said, go back to the hotel and take whiskey and paracetamol. So basically it was the same prescription for a flu type condition and also having what almost was a slip disc. Whiskey and paracetamol. That was Sid Watkins for you.